Well, that was enthusiastic. Absolutely. Was most of that for Abigail? I was just wondering.
It's for you.
Yeah, it's for no. Well, they haven't gotten their grades yet. It ought to be. That was a joke. They never laugh at my jokes, Abigail. I hope you have better luck on the campaign
I'm
trail.
very funny.
Yeah, you're very funny. Good. That's great. Look, we are absolutely thrilled to have you here. And mainly, these are students in various classes of the Center for Politics and elsewhere. Are there any other parts of the University of Virginia other than the Center for Politics? I'm not aware of it, but there may be. I've forgotten some things, mainly from the Center for Politics. And we are just delighted to have, well, this is part 2 of the gubernatorial presentation. I want to make clear so that we don't get any semi-friendly emails or phone calls or visits to Pavilion 4, that we had the Republican candidate back at the end of April. Now the campaigns picked the dates, so we did essentially the same thing, reception at Colonnade Club then, and a speech here for the other candidate. I'm trying to remember her name, but I'll come to it. That's 73. Again, I'm age 73. So we've had, this will be our second installment here, but we have to admit this is special because Abigail Spanberger is a University of Virginia graduate. Late 90s, you graduated in 2001, right?
Yes.
May or June, whatever it was, of 2001. And your husband, Adam, was also a University of Virginia graduate. I guess you met him here.
We actually knew each other in high school.
Oh my God. Well, whether that's good or bad, that's interesting information.
It means I met my mother-in-law one time at a prom, actually, at high school, and I thought, oh, that's so awkward that his mom is at prom. We were just friends then, but now she's my mother-in-law. She was a teacher, that's why she was at prom. I forgot that
sure.
relevant piece of information, actually.
No, we're not embarrassed, really, we're not. I actually met her husband before I met her because her husband was in my 101 American Government class. I used to meet over at Wilson Hall back when they trusted me to teach that many students. It was a big class, and Adam really stood out in the class of 400 or so, because he used to take his afternoon nap there. And that was fine with me. I mean, they're paying for it. It doesn't bother me particularly unless they snore. I do have to have people sitting next to them wake them up at that point. I'm not necessarily saying that was true in Adam's case, but why would I bring it up otherwise? But anyway, you let him know. You know how much mileage I'm going to get out of that in the next 4 years? You have any idea how much mileage?
A fair amount.
A fair amount. You're darn right. So you be sure and tell him I appreciate his falling asleep. Let's get into the substance of this, because I've got some very tough questions for you, but they're nothing compared to what the students are going to ask you. I'm going to start out with a number, which the audience should know, and they probably don't. 75. We have had 74 governors in Virginia. 74 have been male. The 75th will be a woman at last. We all knew the first couple, you know, Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson, and I really don't know who came after that, but because I wasn't alive then, believe it or not, I wasn't around. But I know we're going to remember the 75th because this has been a long time coming, and we're all looking forward to that. I can tell you one way or the other, and I can tell where this crowd is, and I think you can too. You have 3 daughters with Adam, and we're looking forward to getting your eldest here. And Michael Sloan is in the back, who is a fantastic music director, Glee Club and lots of other things. And we want to see you afterwards because her daughter would like to focus on music. And unfortunately, is being drawn through bad information, potentially to another
She's gonna kill
college.
me.
Well, then you shouldn't have told me. I mean, because, you know, anything anybody tells me, I repeat. I mean, that's just, what? Well, very good. That's why we invited you. Now, come up and talk to us, because we're going to have a special trip. You know what I mean? And you're going to be the center of it, Michael. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Where does that come from? Now, you are the candidate. And I had to mention that because that's a nod to Robert Redford, who passed away today at 89. The Candidate was, I think, one of his best films. And it's not easy being a candidate. It's, you run into all kinds of people who say good things and bad things and sometimes don't have a clue. But thank goodness we have an auditorium here, a dome room, Mr. Jefferson's fantastic dome room, full of intelligent, active people who know what they're doing, who know the issues, and are going to do a great job asking questions. And who's handling the mics? Kenneth Stroop and Glenn Crossman. I'm going to start it off with just several questions, very, very tough, which you might regret coming, but I've just got to ask you these things. It's been burning me. I do have to mention, though, your staff asked me to mention this. You have had an unusual career. You were a postal inspector, going after those who launder money and traffic in drugs. And that's what they told me. Now, if it's not true, you take after your staff. I wish you would come back to that so you could get my mail delivered. That's the one thing I would love to have back, is delivery of mail here. But that's another subject. But then you were a case officer for 8 years with the Central Intelligence Agency. And I just want to know one thing.
Okay.
Are you in the deep state?
No.
Because I didn't think so. You're never at our cocktail parties.
Well, I've never been invited.
Well, that will change after January, mid-January. Anyway, there's a great conference out at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, but we'll talk about that later. But this is interesting. I want to find out more about what you're doing in the CIA. Are you allowed to talk about that, or is it still totally off limits?
When I went through the process of getting my employment declassified, there are very clear guidelines about what it is that I am able to talk about. So yes, ask away.
Okay. Have you ever been to Dealey Plaza in Dallas? Oh, that's right. You're not that old. She was born.
The answer is no, by the way, as well.
I ask everybody who's in the CIA whether they know anything about November 22nd, 1963, and whether they've been to Dealey Plaza. And I'm glad to hear you say no. So I thought that's what you say, but I had to ask. Then you were in Congress. This is taking forever, but I know you're enjoying it. You were in Congress for 6 years from a very tough district.
Yes.
The Democrat hadn't been in that seat. I remember the last guy, Jack Marsh.
Who? Do you know when his birthday was?
Don't tell me it was August 7th.
It was.
No, we are both August 7th babies, separated by just a few years.
He's a couple years older.
Okay. Jack is dead.
No, but I meant you.
Oh, No, I think they guessed. Just a few years.
Yeah, he was August 7th too.
We had your colleague in Congress and my former student here at UVA, Chip Roy from Texas, the congressman from Texas, now running for the Attorney General. But we don't like to mention him, so we're going to drop that.
To any of the students in the class, if you really want to amp up his blood pressure, you could mention that.
Yeah, you could talk about Chip Roy. They have no idea, and I'm so glad you don't know who he is. You have no idea how happy I am. Google him. Not here, but later on. I want you to Google him. All right, let's get to the important stuff here. You were, now, the 7th District, which is really tough and had been held, you defeated an incumbent. And we had Republicans in, my two crystal ball guys over here, do the House and the Senate and governor and everything, really, everything for Sabatow's crystal ball. Soon to be just the crystal ball. Because, the age thing again. But the 7th is tough. I mean, that is
Yeah,
very Republican district.
I was the first Democrat elected there since 1968. And my predecessor in the 2016 election, he had won re-election by 15 points. And then when I won in 18, I won by just under 2 points, so nearly a 17-point swing.
That is amazing. And he defeated Eric Cantor,
That's right.
who was on his track to be House Speaker.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a tough district to win. She won it. She won it again and again. She was on Intelligence, Foreign Affairs, Agriculture Committee. And what was most interesting to me, you actually were determined to be the most bipartisan member of Congress from Virginia.
Correct.
You worked with both sides, tried to bring them together, which everybody's talking about all of a sudden. She was there many, many years ago doing that, which is, you know, a good thing. It's not easy, that's for sure, but it's a good thing. So let's get to the questions. I do have three. The first is, and I hate to start with a bad subject, but you have to because of what happened last week. And it didn't just happen last week with Charlie Kirk. It happened with the Minnesota House Speaker, former Speaker, her husband, both murdered, another state legislator nearly murdered, and his wife nearly murdered, and the dog was murdered. I mean, what a sicko. And that, of course, they were Democrats. And then before that, you had Governor Shapiro's home, the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania, firebombed right after they had had dinner on the first night of Passover, his whole family. And we could go on all night mentioning these terrible, horrible incidents that happen on both sides, despite what you may hear from some very misinformed people in high office. It's both parties that are responsible, or both parties at least have had examples of this terrible thing happen. Given your bipartisan record and having been saluted for that, what can a governor really do to bring people together, bring the two parties together, when the American people, I think maybe because of social media, are addicted to outrage? What can you do as governor?
Well, and I think when we look at what happened last week, it should be easy for everyone to denounce political violence. It should be a straightforward exercise in stating the obvious, which is to continue to have a boisterous, interesting, exciting democracy. We need to know and recognize that we will disagree vehemently, and that people will say things that we don't just disagree with at times, but that we take great issue with. But like the foundation of our society is one where in the United States of America, people have a right to free speech. And once we move or accept a place where political violence or this sort of zero-sum game becomes the accepted reality, that changes the entirety of the landscape of what our political discourse can be. And so I think it's incredibly important that anyone running for office, especially anyone in elected office, and in particular a governor of a state, demonstrate the type of leadership and steadiness and focus that endeavors to really put our communities and our country first in the things that we do, the policies that we pursue, and even the way that we speak about them. And I kind of draw upon my background. When I first began my career in public service, I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and in doing so to protect the community that I was serving. And that idea of it being a mission, something that you're devoted to, I think that even throughout my career, as I've sworn an oath to the Constitution many times over, and we do it for elected office, I think at times people forget what that oath is. It's an oath to our fellow citizens. It's an oath to the priorities that we want to move forward. And you know, there are many people who may disagree with me on some of the priorities that I want to push forward, the policies I wish to pursue. But I think it is incumbent upon me as a candidate, and ultimately when elected as governor, to speak to why those policies I believe are going to help people, are going to be good for Virginia. And I think there's a need for real steadiness in politics. And you know, I've had members of the media along the way. It would say things like, well, you're not very exciting, which maybe they worded it in a slightly better way, but that's certainly how I hear it. And I think it's kind of an interesting premise, right? When it's like, who's coolest on TikTok? Like, I'm never going to be coolest on TikTok, and I'm okay with that, because I'm not trying. I'm trying to be someone who's working to govern. During my time in Congress, it was policy making as a candidate, and ultimately when I'm serving as governor, it will be in governing and working with legislators to drive policy that matters, to run an administration that's working aggressively and efficiently to deliver services across the state. And I think that sometimes, as we have witnessed, more and more politics can be a path towards being in the news, not to necessarily talk about policies, but to talk about this divisive issue or this mean tweet that somebody sent or received. It changes the landscape of our political discourse. And so I think the best thing that I can and will do as governor is to demonstrate and model the type of just civic focus, commitment to Commonwealth and country that I think our country and frankly the people of Virginia deserve. And that means bringing intentionality to it as well, making sure that when I'm doing things across the state or when I'm engaging with people, that it isn't just the people who are happiest to see me, but it's people who I'm, on the campaign trail, I'm asking for their vote, whether it's an automatic because of their political persuasion or a bit of a longer exercise in earning someone's trust. And I think the more we can lower the temperature, which is something that people say rather frequently, and then turn around and use the type of rhetoric that just kind of puts it through the roof. I sincerely believe that that's what we need in politics. It's a little bit my disposition. So I think it is my natural inclination. But I just think that anyone in a position of leadership, you have to be steady because there will be emergencies that come at you in all sorts of ways. And if you're not steady, if you're not calm, if you're not focused, how do you react to those types of emergencies, and how can you be trusted to make good decisions?
Well, that's a very good answer. You'd think that with what has gone on in Washington and around the country, but particularly Washington, people would be tired of being excited. But I guess some people just have a high tolerance for that sort of thing.
I think people are tired of the drama, though.
I hope.
I do think so, right?
You'd hope so. You'd hope so. People say one thing and then they perhaps vote another way for different reasons. But we're getting to the point where the average citizen even can sense that we're off track. And I judge this by the people that come up to me, and I'll bet to you, in grocery stores or at gas stations, and they'll say, "What in the heck is going on? Yeah. Is this going to go on for years more? Is it going to get worse?" Yeah. And that suggests that maybe people are catching on, although they didn't catch on fast enough, did they? Well, that's very interesting. Let me follow that up by asking you this. Probably, we never know what the economy is going to do, but given the tariffs, given lots of other things, and certainly given the cuts that Trump has made right in the beginning of this term, Virginia is not going to be in as good a shape as it has been in some past governorships. We're going to lose, we already have lost a lot of money. It could very easily get worse, and probably the state will have to make up a lot of that money. How will you approach that? You can't give specifics at this point because we don't know the amounts, but how are you going to approach that? And what are your priorities on spending whatever money we end up having? In 30 seconds. Yeah, 30 seconds will be fine.
So I think the general premise of your question is an interesting one, and without endeavoring to kind of bog everyone down with facts and figures that are not the happiest, the reality is the impact of the tariffs have been significant on Virginia. Since January, we've seen a 9% decrease in container volume coming through at the Port of Virginia. And so what does that mean in terms of what's being offloaded, what's being unloaded, for jobs at the port, for truck drivers necessary to get those items there or back? We've seen the impact of tariffs kind of impact businesses across the spectrum, in addition to increasingly consumers at the store. Then you add on to that the impact of the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, where we know that bill will increase costs in housing, in energy, and in healthcare. In healthcare, and specifically, it will be nearly catastrophic for Virginia. More than 350,000 Virginians are likely to lose their healthcare, and we know that at least 6 rural hospitals are likely to close. Our safety net hospitals are going to be facing dire circumstances and decisions, and already the state Medicaid system has said that they're expecting $26 billion less coming into the state, and that is an impact that you cannot just make up. And so kind of contending with that reality, in addition to loss of revenue from the fact that the DOGE cuts have meant thousands of Virginians have lost their jobs. Small business owners, in many cases, some government contractors have lost their jobs. Restaurant owners, other small businesses have seen decreased patronage. The impact on our state revenues, in fact, are going to be rather significant. And so that's the sort of negative lay of the land. I'm of the opinion that you can really only contend with or deal with problems that you are willing to admit. And so the first bit of recognizing how bad it may be is understanding that, and then from there you can actually proceed with trying to mitigate the harm. Importantly, as it relates to the Medicaid cuts, one of the things that is a key factor here is the way that people will lose Medicaid is when they cannot validate that they are working. Now, Virginia already has a workforce validation process in place. We validate that someone is working once a year. The new federal requirement will be twice a year. Cynically, the House of Representatives voted for that actual provision to go in place after the 2026 midterms. So once they get through the midterms, then people lose their health care. But that means that we also have a slight benefit of time, because while the state currently has a backlog with our requirement to validate employment once a year, moving to twice a year means we need to get our act in order and deliver, make sure that the state program is running as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Because the reason that bill assessed that there would be cost savings would be because they basically would ensure that people could fall through the cracks, that someone who's working but might not have the ability to go down to the local Medicaid office or the state office, or might not have a computer at home to validate things at home, that those people would end up falling through the cracks and falling off of Medicaid. So the state, in order to mitigate harm through the governor's office and through the proper administration at the state level, we have to do all that we can possibly do to try and create as best a scaffolding as possible, so as few people as possible will lose their health care. And then looking towards January, what it's going to be in terms of revenue coming in based on jobs lost and employment taxes not being paid, we'll be in a difficult situation. That is the real picture that we're looking at. But importantly, a lot of the priorities that I intend to pursue in the proposals that I have put out, my plan, my affordability plan, a plan to lower costs in housing, healthcare, and energy, not all of those elements of the plan cost money. Some of it is improvements in the way that we actually function, some cutting of red tape, some giving localities the ability to, in a Dillon rule state, make the choices that are best from them. As it relates to healthcare, some of it's ensuring that from the governor's office and the attorney general's office, we're looking at some of the kind of price elevation that comes through PBMs, or the inability to choose the pharmacy of your choice, particularly in rural communities. So some of what we can do through legislation and ultimately through the governor's office, some of those things themselves will ultimately have the goal and the purpose of lowering costs, but are not necessarily costly provisions in and of themselves. For me, in addition to lowering costs, in housing, healthcare, and energy, public schools are, I think, central, both to the strength of our communities, our civic engagement, and the future of our workforce and the next generation. And of course, investing in schools and paying teachers and ensuring that our kids have strong school buildings surrounding them, particularly in many communities where some of our schools are close to, if not more than 100 years old, is a major priority. And those types of investments, yes, those do cost actual dollars. But I think that it's a question of what are the investments that we're making. And so, with a balanced budget requirement, you always have to look at what you're bringing in and what you're pushing out. But there was a bill in the General Assembly that passed in the past that would actually just give localities the ability to, with local support, increase their local sales tax no more than 1% for the purpose of renovations or infrastructure investments in local public schools. And that's a bill that passed with bipartisan support, but unfortunately the current governor vetoed. And so that wouldn't be a state action, that would be enabling local action if they want to take it for the purpose of investing in their own communities, rather than raising property taxes on houses, particularly in communities that might already be at a place where people are feeling stretched with the cost of housing.
That's a much more politically acceptable and doable option, to have localities take the responsibility for it, and maybe they put it to a referendum vote or something, so that the people themselves get to determine that, rather than having statewide tax increases. Well, that's very interesting, and I think I got a broader view of what her priorities are, and I'm sure all of you did too. And my final question, so that you can get ready to ask yours, and the students get to go first, because they pay tuition, and I just feel like that's the appropriate thing to do. Or somebody pays it for them. I don't know whether they're paying it or somebody's paying it. But my final question is, in life, I think, and old people get to say things like this, it's extremely important to have good role models. And role models have helped all of us who are older to get through tough times and to do better than we would have otherwise done in good times. And you've had some fascinating experiences in different sectors of our country and government. As you look over those experiences that you've had, especially but not exclusively Congress, who were the people you encountered that you regarded as especially admirable? Not that you agreed with them on everything, or that you'd follow their point of view on everything, but who did you look to? Who did you trust and why? And in other words, who would you attempt to emulate as governor of Virginia, the 75th governor of Virginia?
And my options are members of Congress.
No, anyone.
Okay.
It can be anyone, even people in this room. Pick Mark Bowles. He would be a good one to pick.
So that broadens my options. When I was interested in kind of the early stages of viewing where I might go as a professional, and knowing that I wanted to spend time focused overseas and on issues of national security and diplomacy, the person I thought who was just, in my mind, the most amazing example was Madeleine Albright. And interestingly, I had the occasion to meet her multiple times. She ultimately campaigned for me and really endeavored to. There was a couple of us who were all elected in 2018 who had a national security background. Alyssa Slacken from Michigan, Chrissy Houlihan from Pennsylvania, Mikey Sherrill, the Democratic nominee for governor in New Jersey, and Elaine Luria here in Virginia. And she really kind of took us under her wing, would come to events for us, was always sort of encouraging us. And she passed away a couple years ago, and we all attended her funeral together. And what the most remarkable thing was throughout her funeral is like the different stages and chapters of leadership, of engagement, of service to country that she had throughout her life. And what I found remarkable, particularly as someone at the time serving in Congress, was the fact that her public service never ended. It just came in different forms. And her leadership and her mentorship never changed. It just came in different waves. And I thought that was a tremendous example, because sometimes in politics, people will get behind this mentality of like, only they can do something, right? And if I leave Congress, who on earth would possibly right, sort of take one's place. And I think that mentality is what gets us into trouble as communities, because I think as leaders, we should always be thinking like, who is going to replace me? Because like there will come a time where I want to be reading a book and drinking something other than water on a Tuesday night at 7:06 p.m., right? And so how do you build up the people who you can lift up and who you can build up so you can be imminently replaceable because you've set a good example? And, hearkening back to my time at CIA, I had a boss in one of my duty stations, and because of where we worked in a SCIF, which is, the classified space, and so we worked in a SCIF, so an office within an office. In our portion, nobody could come in apart from CIA officers, which meant that, we needed to take out our own trash and we needed to vacuum our own office. And our chief of station would vacuum the office every Friday afternoon. And, he was a little bit of an aberration in that organization, but I remember thinking, like, there's any one of us newer officers who he could easily say, so-and-so, take out the trash, so-and-so, you got to vacuum. But I think it was with great intention that he would demonstrate amid all of the things we were doing, all of the work. Here's a man who'd spent pretty much his entire professional career focused on the counterterrorism threat and target, who most Fridays would take, 20 minutes to vacuum the office. I think to make sure and make clear that like everything within the scope of our responsibilities was within his purview as well, and that he would not ask us to do anything that he himself wouldn't do. And so kind of as I think about what it is that you can do as governor, I look to what some of, and once you start naming names, people get quickly antsy about which ones you name. So I'll just look, in some of the East Coast examples, limiting myself. But if you look, a couple states north of us with what Governor Shapiro has been able to do in an emergency situation, right? There's collapse of 95, to just be steady and say, we're going to fix it and we're going to do it, and that's it. And frankly, achieve something that impacts for commerce in Virginia, in Maryland, up and down the I-95 corridor at a pace and a level that nobody thought would be possible. But it's because of the leadership that you can do it. You look over to what Roy Cooper, former governor of North Carolina, now Governor Josh Stein is there, what he was able to do in utilizing and leveraging Medicaid dollars to pay off medical debt. So frequently we look at kind of what can be the impetus to someone really moving in a dire circumstance towards bankruptcy and losing their home. And for many people, unfortunately, medical debt can be that first real tragedy that puts them on such uneven financial footing. And here you have a governor who found a way to make sure that a surprise medical emergency is not the first path towards financial ruin. And you think about the fact that that's not something that he's known for. It's not something that, frankly, I've even heard him herald. But the number of lives that he's changed, and it's wonky policy, how he made it happen, what the impacts were, doesn't go well in a TV ad, all the rest of it. But like it meaningfully changed people's lives. And I think that even looking at the types of ways where if you're looking to just do right by people and get creative and fix things and solve things and improve people's lives and recognize that they may never need to know how it happened, but if that person who's now able to get to work, or that small business who's now able to get their shipment because of 95 got fixed and they can keep their business alive, like that is meaningful. The person who's had their medical debt erased, they may never know the full details of how it happened, but like their life is forever changed for the better because someone prioritized like good policy and just figuring things out.
And I guess the governorship in Virginia being limited to one consecutive 4-year term helps to do that, in that you can focus on that without having to worry.
And nobody will ever say, oh, but in your re-election, there is none.
Yeah. So term limits make a lot of sense, except for tenured faculty members. There are always exceptions, you know. You've got to make these distinctions. All right, look, those are my questions for you. As I said, the students always ask much better questions. Of course, they don't have any limitations, so feel free to, you know, grade them down if you wish.
Oh, am I grading people?
Yeah, you're grading people.
Are you a hard grader?
Yes. Well, I'm going to leave it up to you. You can grade easy. Well, you got to get votes. Grade easy. Who's first? Who's picking them out? Ken.
Hi, my name is Vera, and I'm a second year. I would like to say thank you for being here tonight. My question is, we know that the rise of the cost of living is a major concern for Virginians. How does your Affordable Virginia plan look to keep data centers and energy companies accountable to protect Virginians' pockets?
Well, Vera, thank you for knowing about my Affordable Virginia plan. If you go to affordablevirginia.com, you can read our plans. And one of the pillars of the affordability plan to lower costs is focused on energy. And something that I hear about across Virginia is a concern about what, as people are seeing their energy costs rising, you know, there's worry that high energy users, in this case data centers, might be part of that process. So importantly, I think, for anyone worried about this, there is an SCC case going through right now determining whether or not there can be a separate rate level for high energy users, specifically data centers. But I think the basic element, both in hopefully what will come out of that rate case, but what I will work on as governor separately or in addition to that, is to ensure that we are not just having data centers or high energy users pay their fair share, but that community members recognize that they are. And really the whole purpose there is, as we are seeing energy rates increasing, there's many reasons for that. In fact, Virginia is the largest net importer of energy in the country. So of any state in the whole country, you know, we have to import the most energy to ensure that we are powering our state's needs. That means that we need to demonstrate real leadership on increasing energy generation, because in addition to the sort of, you know, what could be just, you know, it has actually great meaning for me, Vera, you know, the fact that large energy consumers should be paying their fair share. Like, that is only actually possible in the landscape where we are also increasing overall generation here at home and ensuring that we can meet our overall energy needs. And so ensuring that we are continuing to build out new energy generation. In fact, Virginia is, you know, proudly on path towards having the largest offshore wind project in the country off the coast of Virginia Beach. We are also a state that is slated to have our first small modular reactor. So advanced nuclear is eventually coming to Virginia. It's still a ways off. But we are a state where we have significant production through nuclear production, and so we're a great place for us to, you know, really examine and invest in newer technologies. And so it is about increasing overall generation, being clear that there's a real opportunity for Virginia to show leadership in increased generation, and then ultimately when that produced energy is going out, that it is, that, you know, those rates are kind of measured out fairly. Because frankly, I look forward to welcoming any business that wants to come to Virginia, but I do recognize the particular unique challenges that high energy users really do put on our infrastructure, most specifically our electrical grid.
Good. Very substantive. Who's next? You all are supposed to be picking them.
Hi, my name is Celia, and I'm a fourth year, and I wanted to ask you a bit about your affordable healthcare plan. I know you had mentioned a bit before about rural healthcare disparities in Virginia, particularly how PBMs can raise prescription drug prices and how rural hospitals are expected to close due to the reconciliation bill. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about your plan for addressing rural health disparities in Virginia, as well as providing affordable health care throughout the state.
Yeah, so I told a little bit of a story of doom and gloom related to the kind of trajectory we're on because of the reconciliation bill, and that's a reality. But I think it's also an opportunity for us to get really creative in how it is that we address the challenges within our healthcare system, whether it is through expansion of telehealth services, and to be clear, that is not a full-on replacement for the ability to go to the doctor in your community. But there is much that can be done and achieved through expanded telehealth services. And that was something that, frankly, we saw during the pandemic and a priority that I worked on from a federal perspective during my time in Congress. Ensuring that the state recognizes that, you know, our healthcare infrastructure, hospitals, clinics, physician's office, dentist's office, they are not just healthcare providers, they are employers. They are drivers of the economy. And I say that because it's a perspective that I will bring to bear when looking at the types of investments that the state may or may not make or be able to make in supporting the stabilization of, you know, healthcare infrastructure in some of our more rural communities. I think that leveraging other voices, and what I mean by that is, you know, when we talk about, you know, Virginia's a great place to bring and attract businesses. Well, if you look at the CNBC rating, which is CNBC rates the top state for business. We had been first for a while. We lost it to North Carolina. I told Governor Stein not to get so comfortable because we're coming for the title.
When was that lost?
This year.
Oh, this year?
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
Okay.
You can make whatever assumptions you want, but actually you don't need to, because CNBC said it's because of the instability within our economy, in part because of DOGE. And so, you know, this is why I do think it's incredibly important that we actually have a governor who will stand up for our economy and the Virginians who've lost jobs and push back against a reckless administration that is, in fact, wreaking havoc on our economy. But linking that back to the concept and the discussion of rural hospitals, you know, so many parts of Virginia are places where businesses or investment may wish to come. But when they are looking about where they should go to make those investments, the things that, you know, large companies or investors or manufacturing or CNBC, the things that they are looking at is infrastructure. You know, if they put a manufacturing plant somewhere, can you get in and out? Energy. Can you link it up to the grid? Schools. If you're trying to get people to move to this community, are there schools for their kids? Housing, is there housing in the area? And healthcare. If you're trying to build out a manufacturing plant and you're trying to say to people, let's come move to this great community and don't worry, the nearest hospital is 3 hours away. The impact of that is not just somebody's ability to go to the hospital. You are now creating a circumstance where people with chronic illness might need to move away from home, where you will have a very hard time attracting investment, and that economic future that could have been propelled forward becomes imminently more limited. And so even in terms of talking about, you know, what it is to have a rural hospital close, yeah, it impacts the people in that community, but there's much larger, broader impacts on the Commonwealth of Virginia in really meaningful and substantive ways. And that, you know, talking about that doesn't solve the problem, but having additional perspectives in how we view it, I think brings more people to the table in trying to figure out how to solve it, or at least improve upon a difficult circumstance.
Great.
Hi there. My name is Keone Vega. I'm a fourth-year student at UVA.
President of his class, every year.
And neighbor to Mr. Sabato.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, yeah.
I think you have a package outside your door. We walked by.
It's Amazon.
Yeah.
Short and sweet question, but what is your vision for UVA moving forward in the coming years, particularly in regards to the Board of Visitors and how it currently stands? Thank you.
All right, everyone should get comfortable. So, you know, taking my admitted kind of proud UVA alumna bias off the table, we have a unique system here in Virginia, and I'm sure all of you are aware, we have a unique system here in Virginia where the governor appoints members to the Board of Visitors, and those members turn over year after year, and the new governor, and as we established, we've got a one-term limited 4-year term. So at the end of, towards the end of any governor's time in office, those boards of Board of Visitors turn over completely, unless, as has historically been quite common, many incoming governors will reappoint people to board positions to keep some continuity. That unfortunately didn't happen in the case of UVA at all. And so what we have seen is we have seen how a university where there is a willingness from the federal government to really overreach, from the Department of Justice to target, call it academic freedom, call it an individual university, that we have a system that makes our universities vulnerable to that. If you also have members of the Board of Visitors who do not wish to stand up for the academic freedom and the autonomy of a university. And I find it really egregious on multiple levels because it isn't just UVA, the university, that's impacted. It's UVA, the driver of so much of Virginia's economy. UVA, the place that attracts students and professors to come here and stay here. UVA, the place that graduates students who go on to start businesses in Charlottesville and Northern Virginia or back home in their communities across the Commonwealth. And so every time that UVA or any other Virginia university, because now George Mason is in the thick of it, is in the news for some negative reason, because there's some kind of attack on the university coming out of the Department of Justice, it is a day that we are, watching a degradation of some of the sort of basic values that certainly I learned here as a student about what to expect in the notion of academic freedom and exploration of thought, et cetera. We also clearly, I think it's become quite clear that when you have university counsel appointed by an attorney general, and then you have an attorney general who's trying to win points with the Department of Justice and with a president who likes, attacking free speech and public universities, and privates as well. The sort of unique vulnerability is that you make it so the university can't defend itself. And so that's what we witnessed. We had a board that was willing to just stand by while attack after attack came. And we have a system that does not allow the university to either defend itself with its own attorneys or, frankly, even bring in outside counsel. And so there is a real clear need, I think, to make some fortifications in the system, not just for UVA, but unfortunately UVA is the example where we saw weaknesses in the system that we have here in Virginia. And so changes to how it is that we make appointments. I think there's a whole array of things that people have brought to me for consideration. I think it's absolutely critical that university counsel gets moved out from under the Attorney General's office so that universities can have lawyers who are focused with a clear focus on doing what's best and right for a university. And it is a public university, right? The mission statement of UVA has to be approved by the General Assembly, right? It isn't that anyone is saying that all of our universities should just sort of go off and, with total disregard from the fact that they're public universities. But that doesn't mean that a single governor who, might wish to curry favor with a reckless president should be able to, undo or harm, flagship universities here in the Commonwealth. And so I think that, frankly, it was interesting a year ago. So in May of 2004, I was here on grounds, and this young woman was a third year, so I guess she's graduated. And I was meeting with a group of students, and I had launched my campaign, so I was a candidate for governor. And this, people were asking me a variety of questions, still early in the campaign comparatively. And this young woman raised her hand and says, "What's your methodology on university board appointments?" And I said, I will answer your question in a moment, but can I first ask why you are asking that question? Because it seems like a unique question. And this was at the point in time when there was starting to be some real challenges. Certainly we saw some at BMI, and then we saw some at UVA. And I thought, this is really interesting. And so I asked her why she thought that, why she was asking that. She answered it in a variety of different ways. And she said, at the end of the day, this is also impacting the investment in the education that I have chosen to get, because every time, and at this point in time, UVA was in the news all the time. UVA was in the news all the time, and she said every time UVA is in the news for something that's not good, that impacts the value of the education I am trying to get here. And that continues to stick with me, because I thought, what an important perspective she had as a student on grounds who viewed it as so vitally important that we really kind of steady things. So there's a variety of reforms that I'm digging into. Certainly I think reforms are absolutely impactful and necessary, and will be priorities for me. And again, it's not specific to UVA. Unfortunately, UVA is just the one where it was here that we were able to see the clear weaknesses that can exist in a system that, if someone's willing to either not do their duty to uphold kind of the value and strength of the university, or if someone's willing to use public institutions like this one as a kind of punching bag, it's possible. So there's fortifications that we can make so that will not be possible into the future.
We all listened very carefully to that. That was very useful. Who's next?
Hi, my name is Zach. I'm a second year. Recent polls have shown that many Virginians see immigration as one of the top issues influencing their vote. And in the face of the current administration's crackdowns on illegal immigration at all levels, you've criticized the use of local police to enforce immigration reforms. How will you continue to support fair, just civil immigration reforms while ensuring that Virginia remains as welcoming a place as it has always been?
Yeah. So the kind of heart of the issue is that our immigration system is really broken, and it is a requirement that Congress, that the federal government actually enact immigration reform in a meaningful way. And for those of you saying, well, weren't you just in Congress? The answer is yes, I was just in Congress. I worked on issues of immigration reform, whether it was kind of peeling off a piece of it, and we passed a bill called the Farm Workforce Modernization Act in the House, tried to get it to move in the Senate, and we couldn't. We passed a bill called the Dream and Promise Act, specific to Dreamers. We passed it in the House, couldn't get it to move in the Senate. There is a bipartisan bill written by Veronica Escobar, a Democrat from Texas, and Maria Salazar, a Republican from Florida, called the Dignity Act. And that's a bill that I supported during my time in Congress, and we couldn't get that bill to even come forward for a vote. Then there was a bill that originated in the Senate, had the votes in the Senate, it would have had the votes in the House, but it was when the 2024 election was heating up, and unfortunately, it appeared that the current president really viewed immigration as a solid campaign issue, and one that would go away if we actually made a meaningful step forward by passing that bill. So unfortunately, it actually, they tanked it before it ever had a chance to move forward. It would have passed the Senate on a full vote on its merits. It would have passed the House, and certainly then President Biden made clear he would have voted for, or he would have signed it. So I say that as a landscape issue because right now, states are just adjusting to a broken system, and the administration is choosing to be highly aggressive in the way they react to that broken system, rather than fixing a broken system. And I have been quite clear in the fact that I oppose any sort of mandates that require localities to, frankly, do the work of ICE officials. And I say that for a variety of reasons. Local police should be doing the job of policing in their communities. And that means investigating crimes, doing community policing, ensuring that they are out doing the search warrants and arrest warrants necessary. And so when I say that they shouldn't be doing the work of immigration officials, what I mean is if there is someone who is suspected of committing a crime, if there is an arrest warrant out there, if there's a search warrant to be executed, absolutely, I think that local, state, and federal agencies can, should, and must coordinate. When I was a law enforcement officer, I worked on a variety of different task forces, and I frequently worked with local police, sometimes assisting on their search warrants and very frequently requesting their support on our federal ones. But the important word that I just kept saying there was warrant, right? When there is a warrant for someone's arrest, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, there must be coordination. Local resources, local folks, local police should be ensuring that whoever the federal agency originating things have the support that they need. But when we're talking about ICE asking a local police officer to start writing immigration detainers when they could be out investigating crimes, investigating murders, keeping people safe, frankly, that is not how you keep a community safe if you have local police officers or state police officers, not on the road, not out investigating crime, but doing literally the administrative detention orders that should be originating with ICE. And frankly, if ICE wants to get a warrant, they can go get a warrant. And if it's signed by a judge or a magistrate, absolutely that local coordination, support should be there. And so I mean, my position on this is very straightforward because it's an issue of local resources, people and money. And diverting those local resources away from keeping communities safe is ultimately, I think, not what really anybody would want in the end.
Next.
Hi, my name is Lizzie, and as a politically minded student, I was wondering on behalf of other politically active students here at UVA, how to navigate the uncertain and polarized political climate and how to not lose our sparks.
I would say, let me figure out where to start. In the end, I would say also know when to walk away from a conversation, right? Sometimes people want to debate, sometimes people want to engage, and sometimes they don't. And you will not. My husband always tells me this, not everyone is going to like you. Because, I'll walk into a room and I'll see someone with a red, not, Washington Nationals hat, and I'll be like, hello. And my husband will say, not everyone is going to like you. And in fact, I have had occasions of, I walked into, I'll get to your question, but I was one time doing business tours, and I walked into this business, and this woman comes out from behind the camera, or the counter, and looks at me and goes, "My mama hates you." And she was older than I was. And so she had a lot of vitriol on behalf of her mother. And I said, oh, okay. But I was, there on a business tour. She as an employee didn't know I was coming, but her employer knew. So it's not like I'm invading this place. And I said, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. But tell me about your day-to-day. And she worked at this very interesting business. And she was telling me a little bit. And basically, I just started talking to her and asking her too many questions. And in this particular circumstance, right, and it's not always the case, it was really difficult for her to continue with the my mother hates you so much conversation when she's answering questions. And I wasn't going to convince her on politics, but she really did actually have a very interesting story to tell about her day-to-day, which I presume probably informs a little bit of her and her family's political point of view. And I only tell this story because, to her credit, I later found out that, and this was back in the district, she called my Capitol Hill office and spoke with the staff assistant who answered the phone and said, kind of left spoke with the staff assistant and kind of had a little bit of an awkward conversation to say, she was here and I was really mean to her, but I wanted to say, ultimately the woman told them, like, please apologize to her because I was very rude, but it was nice to meet her. And I say that because to that woman's credit, it's one thing if she walked away from that interaction thinking, you know, I was a little meaner than I needed to be, but to actually take the steps to like go online and find my office phone number and call, right? Like it's those sorts of interactions that continue to make me think that sometimes bringing just humanity to the conversation is really important. And so for young people who are super politically engaged, like it is the political process where we make the change that we want to see, where we, you know, move forward, where we enact policies that really do meaningfully impact people's lives. And so if you're passionate about it, like always be passionate about it. And politics is a process, and it's a process of winning people over. It's a process of kind of normalizing discussions. It's a process of, you know, understanding what argument works. And I think that if you want to be sort of dexterous in the conversation, understanding that, you know, what brought you to politics may not be what brings somebody else. And so if you are, you know, really passionate about the issue that brought you to politics, that's amazing. But try to look at other places where you can pull people in. You know, and on the example, like, you know, I'm a Democrat. On Capitol Hill, I frequently would have had many colleagues who back home in their districts, we were talking about, you know, gerrymandering in super blue, super red districts, like they can walk in any room and say, climate change is an existential threat, and everyone claps, and then they're done, right? Point made, everyone's happy. But I think that, well, that must be lovely for them, right? Like that's never been my experience. If I want to talk about the national security implications of rising sea levels, or the impact of flooding along coastal Virginia, and the fact that it is super expensive if your house gets flooded, you know, your flood insurance rates are going to go up in addition to the fact that it's, you know, really a problem to contend with that flood, or you know, changes in extreme weather events can really negatively impact agricultural Virginia, and so conservation practices are some of the ways that we contend with that. You know, all at the same time, you can bring different people to the same conversation, and it's not saying different things to different people. It's more just kind of translating the discussion, because some topics and discussions will be more resonant, and then honestly, some people just want to argue for argument's sake, and if that's not what you want to do, then just smile and walk away, because not everybody has to like you, as my husband says.
Good answer.
Hello, my name is Celeste. Now, this evening you've spoken a bit about the cost of living. My question is, do you have any plans to enact any policies that will incentivize the construction of affordable housing in the Commonwealth?
Yes, absolutely. So in our housing plan, we touch on this in a variety of ways. So affordable housing under, you know, specifically the sort of federal definition of affordable housing, one of the problems that we have here in Virginia is that when that period of affordability phases out, we are seeing increasingly that apartment owners are actually choosing not to keep those houses in affordable housing and are actually selling them out. And we see some large like investor companies coming in, turning those properties over, and then like seemingly overnight, rates are just going up because those properties are no longer within a federal housing program. That is an impactful increase, particularly in, you know, it's impactful everywhere, but in smaller communities, and this is something I've talked about with mayors in some, you know, specific rural communities, where then that just changes the dynamics of the entire market. Because if you have an apartment complex that had been in affordable housing, that gets phased out, they've just changed the market and the sort of market rate for everybody when they jack up those rates. And so I've been looking at and have proposals for how it is we can use, you know, there's a fund for the government or the governor to try and drive investment, how it is that we can incentivize those houses to stay in affordable housing. That's one piece of it. There's a lot of great work being done with land trust development, and we see it across Virginia, but making sure that communities that might be interested in following some of the good models that exist And some of our counties basically have like the Cliff Notes version for how to do that. And then I'll give you one more. There are some places where the state really stands in the way of localities' ability to turn, old, buildings that might be underused, to turn those into houses, whether affordable housing or more affordable, attainable housing, and ensuring that the state gives a little bit more just kind of broad brush flexibility to localities that want to get creative for them to do it, rather than using the kind of setup of our state government to clamp down and eliminate options.
Hi, my name is Easton Weber. I'm a first year here. I read your education plan on your website, but I was wondering if you could go into deeper detail about how you plan to improve and protect our public education.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the question. So in the education plan, we actually pull out higher education. Certainly Virginia's public schools are incredible, and we need to continue to strengthen them and recognize what they are, not just kind of drivers of education and valuable resources, but they're drivers of our economy. They recruit people here. We want you to stay here for the out-of-state students. And that's important, and certainly some of the reforms that might exist as it relates to how we strengthen our universities relative to the board appointment process, et cetera, is a part of that. I also have a focus on early childhood education, because the data are super clear that investments in early childhood education have real long-term impacts and benefits, not just to the individual child, but to the larger community as well, and to their employment trajectory, the taxes they pay, the kind of health outcomes, community outcomes, et cetera. But in the K through 12 space, there's a lot to be done, whether it's investments in infrastructure that either the state can make or we can enable. Frankly, we've moved in the right direction the past couple of years in increasing teacher pay, but we still pay teachers here in the Commonwealth of Virginia far less than our neighboring states, and well below the national average. And certainly recognizing that so many who enter careers as educators aren't doing it as a path towards lucrative careers, but recognizing that every educator I've talked to, frankly, this is actual statement of fact, never leads with, oh, teachers should get paid more. It's teachers should be able to teach. And what that means is ensuring there's enough support staff in the schools, ensuring that kids have access to mental health services, because teachers recognize that in their classrooms, if a child is having struggles or challenges, that impacts the ability to teach in the rest of the class. Food security programs, breakfast and lunch programs, and we're seeing because of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, there will be real impacts on the SNAP program, particularly in Virginia, unless we get our error rates well under control. I have had so many teachers advocate for stronger student breakfast and lunch programs or minimally breakfast programs, recognizing that, again, the data are super clear that when kids have access to a healthy start of their day, that their ability to learn is strengthened. And so looking at what we can do, certainly from the General Assembly standpoint, some of those things I mentioned do cost a fair amount of dollars, but also recognizing that we have seen public education come into the sort of center of this political space where it's become more of a political punching bag than a shared goal of saying, how do we make Virginia's public schools the best in the nation? And it is, I think, through the leadership of the governor's office, the state superintendent, and ultimately the larger Department of Education at the state level, that we can drive some of those clear priorities and ensure that Virginia is a top-notch place to send your kid to school in any corner of the Commonwealth, which is an important element of that.
Great. Next. Let's get both sides involved here, but you can go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. My name is Henry and I'm a third year. We live in a country where the divide between Democrats and Republicans has grown significantly over the past couple of years. Can you talk about your bipartisan work while you were in Congress and how you plan as governor to work with members of the Republican Party to move Virginia forward?
Yeah. So, I'm reflecting on the fact that I am here on a college campus, and I do vividly remember that when I was in college, I was always a very engaged Democrat, but it wasn't kind of a divisive element. There wasn't, as I remember it at least, in us versus them. In fact, I had a friend who one year, ironically, this friend and I had another friend. The true story is that this guy liked my friend, and he was a Republican, and he was super excited about Eric Cantor's election, and somehow he convinced her to go to the election night party, and I got dragged as the third wheel to go to this election night party. And at the time, it was just like charming that like, oh, like the Republican guy who really likes my friend, we're gonna go to this election night party. And thinking about that back then, it was his preferred candidate, and our preferred candidate didn't win. And it wasn't so kind of existential seeming. And the reality is I don't wanna sort of downplay the differences between parties or policies, because in politics, there are some people who pursue truly, truly terrible policies that hurt people, policies that are bad for our country, policies that are, that move us in a direction that I think is not just bad, but really detrimental. And so, getting at your question, I think that it's important to recognize that there has to be a level of intentionality about trying to find common ground or trying to bring more people to the table. And frankly, whether it's more people who already might be inclined to agree with you in the sort of climate change example I gave, or in expanding out a bit further, your efforts to try and convince people. I am a very strong believer that if I think I'm right about something, why would I not try and convince people? And maybe they won't all be convinced, but it's worth the effort. And comically, I think that at times people just get this notion of, it's impossible to agree on things. And I moved a piece of legislation forward that for 40 years, so in the 80s, there was a provision put into Social Security law that basically cut Social Security benefits for retired public servants. In Virginia, principally, firefighters and police officers were most impacted. Some federal retirees, letter carriers, teachers, and depending upon the state, kind of those different groups were impacted more or less, but quite severely in many cases. And what it meant is someone who'd worked their entire life, chose a path of public service, were seeing Social Security dollars they had paid into Social Security kind of taken from them and withheld. And so for many, many years, people tried to change this. I first learned about this issue as a candidate when I was at an event and a woman raised it for me, and I actually thought that she must have misunderstood something and that she was likely wrong because what she was explaining made no sense to me. Like, this can't possibly be true, that upon her husband had passed away, and so she was no longer getting Social Security, and it was really a terrible story, and one that had basically kind of thrust her into unexpected poverty. I get to Congress, and I realize, no, her story is very, very real, and this is very, very true. And in fact, there's been a long time effort to get these provisions repealed. And so I decided that we were going to get it done. And so I started leading the bill, and I led it for my first 2 years in Congress with a guy named Rodney Davis, a Republican from Illinois. And then Rodney retired from Congress, and someone who cared very deeply about this bill, Garrett Graves, a Republican from Louisiana, took over as the co-lead. Well, knowing we were going into a Republican Congress, we made the decision that, in fact, instead of having my name first on the bill, we would have Garrett's name first on the bill, because if you've got a Republican speaker, it makes sense that the bill have a Republican first. So I, made the choice to have, okay, let's list you first and I'll go second. And then we set about trying to figure out how to actually move this bill forward. Now, it's a bill that had, on paper, bipartisan support. So many people would co-sponsor it. So many people said they supported it. But we couldn't get Democratic leadership for my first 4 years to move it forward. And then in my last term, we couldn't get Republican leadership to move it forward. And Garrett Graves from Louisiana and I decided that at the end of the day, we needed to get this done. He was retiring from Congress. It was a passion project for him because people in Louisiana, by virtue of how they, their retirement systems, were thrust into abject poverty because of these provisions. And it meant something to him deeply to be able to make this change. And so, we tried to go through all the different ways that, he could get the Speaker of the House to bring it forward. And ultimately, we decided we can't get leadership on really either side. I couldn't get the Democratic Speaker to do it, and he couldn't get the Republican Speaker to do it. So we decided we'd employ a discharge petition. And then we set about going through the discharge petition process and working through every sort of maneuver to get this bill to move forward, to the point where, even recognizing you need 218 signatures. And so we were always kind of checking the list, how many Republicans have signed it, how many Democrats have signed it. There are many people who, when their party is in charge, will say, I don't sign discharge petitions. So there were a lot of Republicans who, on paper said they supported it, but just as an issue of principle wouldn't sign a discharge petition. And I understood that because I think there were people on my side of the aisle, had we done it with our speaker, they wouldn't have done it either. So we're constantly looking at it because you don't want to have too many Democrats because then you're going to have fewer Republicans. So you got to get enough Republicans. So I'm like begging some of the Democrats, don't sign it, don't sign it. I need more Republicans. It's going to get lopsided. And once it gets lopsided, we won't get enough. And I had a couple Democrats being like, literally the firefighters are like blowing up the phones in my office, begging me to sign it. Like, I can't wait any longer. I'm like, wait another day, we're getting close. I need you to hold back, you'll be fine. Just tell them I'm telling you not to sign it. And in the end, like, we got to 218, and then there was some gamesmanship actually from the former member of Congress from Virginia's 5th District, who on election day, because he had lost his primary, went to the House floor and tried to table our bill.
That's a good story.
Yeah, we were able to get that undone. And in the end, it was the second to last bill that the United States, we voted on it in the House. It passed overwhelmingly, although I'll have to fact check, but I'm 99% sure that Chip Roy voted against it.
Not my boy.
Yeah, I'll double check before I impugn his reputation on that, but I'm pretty sure he did. And then we passed it in the House, more than 300 votes. And then we sent it over to the Senate. It was the second to last thing that they ever passed. And it was the last bill that President Biden did a signing ceremony for. And at that signing ceremony, there were people from across the political spectrum. There were Democrats there, there were Republicans there, there were Americans there who were literally crying because they had been thrust into poverty unexpectedly in their retirement or at the loss of a spouse who devoted himself or herself to public service. And they were so stunned that we actually got it done. And so that's a little bit of a long-winded answer to say that, like, at the end of the day, it's about building coalition. It's about being purposeful. It's not bipartisanship for the sake of bipartisanship, but in a two-party system, right? If I was ever going to get anything through, I came in with a Democratic speaker, but the Senate was Republican, or no, the Senate was Democratic, and we had Republican, and then we had a Republican president, right? Like, if I was going to get anything done, I needed a Republican president to sign it. And then my last term in Congress, we had a Republican Speaker of the House. If I was ever going to bill to move forward, I had to have Republican support for it. And that's just the reality of frankly, how it is that you can get things done and build coalitions. And I do kind of hope that we get to a place where, I know Liz Cheney spent some time here. Once upon a time, she and I were joking about, boy, don't we just wish we can get to a place where we're arguing about tax policy again, right? Because like that's where those differences, I think should lie, where it's, the push and pull of ideas that are meant to make you better, not like the zero-sum game where my idea is my way or the highway. And that is recognizing that, there are people in elected office who pursue, truly bad policy. I'm not saying you should, build bipartisan coalitions around terrible policy, but recognizing that if you are working on something that is good and grounded in, some sort of real purpose, you will find people along the way that you can bring together. And frankly, what I have seen from the General Assembly in Richmond, not to say it's not without some excitement, But it still works a heck of a lot better than Congress works. I think to some degree there's an element of immediacy. You pass a bill in this, in the state, in the House of Delegates, and it goes to the state Senate, and very soon thereafter it's on the governor's desk, and very soon thereafter it's impacting people's lives. And so that type of urgency and immediacy, I think, does demand a different level of cooperation. But I think as governor, it will be incumbent upon me that I might be a Democrat who's elected, but I want to work with members of the General Assembly from across Virginia on the issues that matter to them. And frankly, I've been grateful that there have been Republican members of the General Assembly, who've been willing to have, conversations about next year, these are my priorities, right? Or this is what my community needs. And frankly, I think particularly as it relates to the state legislature and state governance, sometimes issues that matter are not actually you don't find differences of opinion based on party. In some circumstances, it's region to region or kind of industry to industry. And so there's really interesting places. It's not to say everyone's going to agree with me on everything, but I think if you have a great intentionality of trying to bring more people to the table, that you can do it.
Look, all that's fine, but what happened to your friend and the Republican guy who went to the election? I mean, inquiring minds want to know. I was just wondering. Finish that story.
Yeah, you might be surprised to learn they did not end up together.
That's what I figured.
And he has remained very active in Republican politics, and she lives in Charlottesville, actually.
There you go. Well, I knew you'd want to hear the end of that. All right, who's next?
Working at UVA, actually.
Working at UVA, good.
That's where I stopped with my story.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. My name is Ibrahim. I'm a fourth-year politics student. I wanted to ask, I know you touched on freedom of speech a lot as you've spoken today, but I wanted to ask more specifically on the events that unfolded last year on May 4th, where students were brutally arrested by state police after peacefully protesting on university grounds for Gaza. And as you may know, that this has been mostly universally condemned by most departments at UVA and students and faculty. And I just wanted to know, as this comes at a time where free speech, especially on politically polarizing topics like Palestine, Israel, is placing students in danger, how will the dangers imposed onto students participating in their freedom of speech be addressed in your policies? Thank you.
There was a moment where I missed a word that you said based on the microphone, but I don't, if I miss anything in my answer, let me know. So particularly on university campuses, the ability to not just have your voice be heard, but also debate ideas and principles and ideas, to formulate or take on new ideas that may or may not sort of change one's perspective or expand one's perception of something is extraordinarily powerful. And we kind of accept it, broadly speaking, if you're in a philosophy class, or if you're in a history class, or if you're in any variety of places. But sometimes when it is in the here and now of real people's lives and real people's hurt and worry and experience, it becomes very different very quickly. And so to address your question in terms of how I view it, and then also recognizing that there's complicating factors because of the White House and the administration, here within Virginia as governor, the principles that I would abide by is that free speech is central to kind of learning, it's central to the United States, to the kind of basic foundation of our society. And on a university campus and within a university community, there can be parameters placed around that free speech, not limiting that free speech. Just as you can play music, but after a certain hour, and to be very clear, I'm not likening acts of protest to a simple thing like playing music. I'm using it as a less consequential example of where we do put sort of limitations on things. Putting parameters for the safety of students, be they the ones expressing themselves, be they the ones going about their daily lives, is something that I think needs to be determined kind of comfortably and appropriately on each university campus. And I think that recognizing the value of people being able to express themselves, and also the importance of others being able to take on that message, that protest, and be able to inquire or learn from or even kind of hear, that can only be done when everyone feels as though they are not, feels as though that sort of protest space or the First Amendment space is accessible in a way that doesn't sort of change the overall dynamics on a campus. And so kind of brass tacks, what I mean by that is, I think that it is appropriate for university campuses to put certain parameters in place, whether it's timeframes, whether it's prohibitions on, camping out on grounds and the like, but that there be very ability for students to express themselves within a larger, in this case, university community, and that those types of, and that might look very different on UVA grounds versus, another university kind of up the road, or, now I'm naming universities, but at other universities within the state or certainly in other places within the country.
She knows it's grounds, not campus. I'm so grateful for that. I'm grateful. Aren't you grateful? Wake up. Jesus, let's go. We have time for one quick, good question. And whoever takes this mic, we're holding you to a high standard.
Oh, God.
I'm just telling you the truth. Be careful.
Hi, my name is Thomas. I'm a second year. And under Governor Northam's term as governor, he appointed the first cabinet level member to focus on DEI. And that was Dr. Janice Underwood. Happens to be my neighbor back home.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Wait, tell me your name again.
Thomas Schreiner, yes, ma'am.
She's lovely.
Yes, so under Youngkin, that position was dissolved. And so my question to you is, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you, and how do you plan to implement that in your term?
It's a good question. It's actually still a position that kind of exists, and there's still someone in that role, but I don't think they leverage it for all the strengths that it could bring to bear. Before I answer your question, I'm just going to give a sort of perspective answer here. I was a CIA officer, an intelligence officer. I worked undercover my whole time at the agency, and literally it was kind of a central kind of core element of who we were as an agency, that different perspectives, different language skills, different types of people all bring something to bear in your ability to make decisions, in your ability to understand a target or a threat, or your ability to keep yourself safe on an operation. And that is the sort of original genesis of how it is that I view the value of intentionality around the diversity of opinions, backgrounds, experiences, et cetera, that really can and should be brought to bear. I think that within my administration, a focus on, Northam brought in that position, right? A cabinet level position focused on DEI. And so I think sometimes in the larger, political discussion, it's, what does that mean? Well, what it meant in that administration is that there was someone who was bringing a lens of intentionality and inclusivity, and how do we view history here in Virginia, and what are some laws that may still be on the books that reflect a different era, that if you have someone looking at them with that level of intentionality, maybe we want to take them off the books. And nobody actually enforces those laws anymore is maybe we want to do a little better than that. And so I think that, and I say that because I presume you know what the role of that job is, but I think it's important because when we get into these sort of short talking points, I have found that at times DEI means something different to everybody, right? And so anchoring it in the notion that it is about the intentionality of recognizing that people have different skill sets, whether it's because of where they grew up, or because of their race, or because of their religion, or because their parents are 5th generation UVA grads, or they're a 1st generation university attendee themselves, right? All of those perspectives, sometimes people can't necessarily even sort of understand and frame all the different perspectives they bring to bear. Some are obviously far more kind of front of mind. But I think there is strength in that. And so in my administration, I want to have the strongest state government possible. And that means ensuring that we are looking at things from every single angle. That means recognizing that there are strengths across our Commonwealth, and that, frankly, even looking towards cabinet appointments and administration appointees, like there are incredible people who I have never had the occasion to meet. And I say that because when you have the intentionality of saying, how do I bring in people with broad backgrounds, diversity of experience, of education, of life experience, reflective of who we are as Virginians, you can achieve a lot more. And here's a kind of a very real world example. When we were having some of the, in all of the supply chain problems we had along the way, there was a time where there was a shortage of baby formula. And as a member of Congress, I was getting phone calls all the time from people, mostly new parents, very heavily skewed towards women, frantic because they could not get baby formula. And apart from the fact that, there were colleagues, well-meaning, lovely colleagues, who would say, well, why don't they just nurse their babies, right? Not knowing that if a baby is sort of medically compromised, many times they require formula. Many women aren't able to nurse. The list goes on, but at the end of the day, if a child requires formula and the parents can't get it, they don't know how to feed their baby, and there's no other option. So we went through this process of saying, well, let's pull out all the baby formula we can from the National Strategic Stockpile. Let's do that. So we go through this process. Guess what there wasn't at the time in the National Strategic Stockpile? Baby formula. Guess what there was? Dog food and cat food. And the notion of sort of what that meant at that time, who were the people? Clearly, to be sort of reductive, clearly there were pet owners among those making those types of decisions. But in thinking through an emergency situation, if there's mass flooding, if you need to get on the scene and you need to supply emergency sustenance, what's required? Somebody missed it. And so there are places where you can miss things if you're not trying to bring as many perspectives as possible to bear. And so that's, ensuring that level of kind of focus, intentionality, is key and I think important not just to someone trying to make decisions, but frankly to the governance of the state overall.
This has really been a graduate seminar. We have covered so many topics.
You all get A's.
Yeah, well, they can get an A, but they need 3 hours of credit. Fortunately, I think the Dean of Education School is here, and I believe she will offer you 3 hours of credit. Where is she? She left? She will definitely give you 3 hours of credit. It was pledged right here. But seriously, we enjoyed this enormously. And we got a sense of what you think, how you think, and the way in which you will make decisions. And frankly, for me at least, I hope for you, it was very comforting because you were thorough, you care about the subjects, you thought them through, and I know this is a shock to people, but that isn't always true with public people in high office. Won't name anybody, Trump. I think we ought to avoid names if at all possible. Trump. But look, I'm going to ask you one. I wish we could go on and on. There were a lot more questions. But for security reasons, and that's a very important subject these days, we're going to allow Abigail Spanberger and her excellent staff to leave first. And while they are leaving, I'm going to ask you not just to give her a round of applause, as intense as it should be, but also to remind everybody that you know, and to be maybe even texting them, that Friday begins early voting. Thank you so much for your time. You were terrific. That was great. That was wonderful, it really was.
Thank you.
Fantastic,
Thank you.
fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love you, Mom. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.